worship this morning. Good to see all of you here. We're going to be looking at 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 16 through 30. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, picking up with verse 16 where we left off last week. Second Corinthians 11, let's begin with 16. Again I say, let no one think me foolish, but if you do, receive me even as foolish, so that I also may boast a little. Paul began chapter 11 with the request of the Corinthians that they would bear with him in some foolishness. Now in verse 16 he returns to this topic of foolishness. And we see here that he doesn't want them to think of him as foolish, but he says even if they do think of him as foolish, he would like for them to then receive him as such. And this sounds a little funny. There's several phrases in this and all that sound a little different from Paul's writing and funny throughout, but I think as we move on into this, you'll see the reasons why he's using terms like foolishness and those kind of things. Paul's foolishness that he's bringing up here, it goes back to boasting. And this is important for us to understand and keep through this, because when he talks about this, he's talking about boasting and it being foolishness. Actually, he hates to defend himself against the false apostles with words that sound like that he's giving self-praise. But some of the Corinthians were being deceived by the false apostles, and in that deception they were believing that these false apostles were highly qualified. They believed that they were so much great in their achievements and the things that they had accomplished, and this was causing them then to be deceived and believe a lie. And as these guys were presenting all these things about themselves, they were then trying to tear Paul down in order to tear his ministry down. So some of the false apostles then were talking big. They were giving great reports about themselves, but again tearing Paul down. And Paul was in a position that if he did not speak up, if he did not speak of his own qualifications, if he didn't speak of his own achievements, then they would believe, the people in Corinth would believe the false accusations the false teachers were making. So Paul points out that then he's going to boast just a little bit himself, simply because they've been boasting. Now he's going to do this thing and boast some on his own. And it's not what he wants to do. And you'll see that as we go through this. He says, what I am saying, I'm not saying as the Lord would, but as in foolishness, in this confidence of boasting. So again, you see in the context here, he's calling his boasting foolishness. So Paul makes it clear then that the boasting that he does here is not from the Lord. He's making it clear, knowing that Jesus never boasted, and knowing that the Spirit of God would not lead the disciples to boast. But under the present circumstances, Paul's character and his message of the gospel, the true message of the gospel, is being discredited. And this fact leads him then to indulge in this most disagreeable thing that he feels forced into here, and that is to begin to talk about himself and to talk about his ministry and to talk about it in comparison with the false apostles and the false teachers. Then he says, since many boast according to the flesh, I will boast also. Now this because of many boasting according to the flesh really comes under three areas here. He speaks of, we can think of it in terms of eternal advantage that they had in God. and the privilege that they had through nationality, birth, and position. We realize that the Jewish people were in a very special position with God. And His will for them was to move right on over into accepting Christ and walking with Him and moving forward. But many of them didn't. And so this special boasting that they're giving here and that He's following up on is nationality, birth, and position. So Paul's opponents then are simply saying that this is who we are, and then Paul turns around and he's saying again, I am like you, I am the same in this. Now 19 he says, for you being so wise tolerate the foolish gladly. Here he justifies his request to allow him to boast as foolishness and as a fool on the grounds that there are people there that are so wise and they consider themselves being so wise that they tolerate then the foolishness gladly of the false apostles and the false teachers. So he's saying, therefore, I think that you ought to be willing then to accept my boasting and my foolishness and not look upon it as objectionable since you accept this from these other teachers. Now verse 20 he says, for you tolerate it if anyone enslaves you, anyone devours you, anyone takes advantage of you, anyone exalts himself, anyone hits you in the face. Now this is an interesting verse here, and he's not only pointing out here that some of the Corinthians gladly put up with the foolishness of the words of the false apostles and the false teachers, but they also suffered in various areas in ways that Paul would have never dreamed to have put the Corinthian people in positions like they placed them in. And so Paul is saying then that he mentions in these areas in which they tolerate the false teachers and the bad things that they were bringing upon the Christians in Corinth. Now he gives 5 areas here in which they were abusing them. The first, he says, enslavement. This word is the Greek word that's the same that is used by Paul in Galatians when he spoke of the Judaizers who were making the Galatians keep the Jewish laws as part of their salvation experience. So we can see then that possibly part of what the false teachers were bringing was something similar to the Judaizers. We've already seen that they were bringing Gnostic information, that they had information and insight beyond what Paul had and beyond what the normal Christian would have. But using this word here would indicate also that they're probably bringing in this teaching that if you're going to be right with God, you've got to be saved through faith in Jesus, plus keep all the Mosaic law. Because it's the same Greek word here. He says they're enslaved in that. And truly, that's what that is. Whenever people in our day teach that you have to earn your salvation and keep your salvation by good works, then those people who believe that are being brought into bondage. They're being brought into slavery. And they are being, the freedom of Christ that He gave us is being removed from them. Now the second is to devour them. The Greek word translated devour here is the same one used in Luke 40:27 by Jesus when He spoke of the scribes who devoured widows' houses. So this could be an indication then that these false teachers were taking advantage of the Christians in Corinth, and he was taking advantage of them in monetary ways, in that they were devouring them. They were taking from them things that they needed to survive on. And then number 3, he says, he uses the term again, take advantage. But here, the word picture of this in the Greek is like trying to catch the Corinthians in a trap like he had set for a bird or an animal. So their desire and their attitude is they want to entrap these people so that they can claim the following that they have, so that they can have people in which they're an authority over. And this happens a lot in our world today. Sometimes people in churches can want to entrap those people that come to that church. They can want to just totally consume them in such a way that they would be told to never go to another church of any kind, that they would be told to, that it would be wrong to go anywhere else to church for any other reason, and just all of these things, that they want to bring these people under bondage and have them just under their authority and be taking advantage of them. Now the fourth, it says they exalt themselves. And what this is really referring to is, as the false teachers were lording their position over the Corinthians, they were making themselves look big and powerful, and they were really exerting their authority over the Christians. And this is not what one Christian should do to another. This is not what Christian ministers should do to the people in their churches. They shouldn't be putting those people in positions in which they appeared to be, and they treated them as though they were somehow a substandard to them. And I've made mention of this before about having observed ministers at times in terms of the way that their congregation just treats them like they're just on a pedestal, like they're just so elite that they've just got to do everything for them, and they've got to just shower all of this affection and shower all this praise and shower all this goodness over them. And if they have a meal or something at the church, the preacher and his wife goes and sits down, and the congregation goes and waits on them and gets in line and gets the food and brings it and serves it to their table and those things. The position in that should be simply this: the pastor and his wife and the leadership of the church should be last in line. Jesus said that we're to be servants, not be served. Yet you can see how it gets twisted around. And when people begin to put their ministers, and their ministers begin to expect to be put up in an exalted position like this, then that's what happens. They lord it over the people in the congregation. And so they begin to feel like there's this great division here. There's the clergy, and then of course here we are, just the lowly lay person. And God never meant it to be that way. He has meant it to be totally different from that. And you can see that this is an area in which these false apostles were bringing false practices and teachings into the Corinthian church. Now the fifth one is, he says that they hit you in the face. Now, some people would try to say that's saying that they probably physically abused them in some manner. I really don't believe that's what it means. I believe what it means is that in any kind of humiliation that they might be presenting and putting these people under is what is being referred to here. But all of these five things it's saying here about their poor treatment to the Christians in Corinth, Paul is simply saying that they're doing it, and the Christians in Corinth are accepting all of it. And it's a pretty sad situation. Now, we go on with verse 21, and he says, "To my shame, I must say that we have been weak by comparison. But in whatever respect anyone else is bold," now listen again, "I speak in foolishness, I am just as bold myself." So Paul is saying that it's to his shame that he has been so weak, and he has not treated the Corinthians in the manner that these false teachers and false apostles have. He says whatever weakness has been shown in him, he's saying, I'm going to be bold now. Though it means speaking foolishly, he's saying, I'm going to be bold just as my opponents now. So what he's doing is he's coming back to say, I'm going to act like they have been acting. This is the kind of thing you take. This is the kind of thing you welcome. You think they're so great, and they're putting me down, and you're following them, and you're turning from me, and you're following these new people, then I'm going to begin to act as my opponents do. And in each case like this, he's not wanting to do that. He's trying to show the people what this is all about. And it's not his pleasure that he's wanting to act in this manner. But he's being forced to, he feels. Now, in verse 22, he says, are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they descendants of Abraham? He says, so am I. So here Paul gives this list of qualifications that the false teachers were boasting of. Now, he comes in and he says, okay, they say they have these qualities. Well, the same truth is true about me. They're Hebrew descent, I'm Hebrew descent. There is Israeli descent, so am I. They're descendants from Abraham, so am I. So he's just laying it out in all of these things that these people were building themselves up as and making a huge issue about. He's trying to say to them, look, they've got nothing on me. I'm all of those same things that they've been boasting about and that you're so impressed with. See, Paul didn't come in boasting this way when he went in and started the church in Corinth. He went in humble. He went in fearful and under the leadership of the Holy Spirit and preached and taught there. And people were saved and the church was established. And now these people are trying to come in and they're trying to take over. And they're trying to turn the people against Paul. And all they can do is just put up all this information about how great they are and how awesome they are and give all their list of qualifications. And he goes on and he says, are they servants of Christ? Then he says, I speak as if insane. You can see here how he detests doing what he's having to do here. But he goes on and says, I more so. In far more labors, in far more imprisonments, beaten times without number, and often in danger of death. The false apostles had boasted that they were ministers of Christ. Paul makes it clear that if they make a boast on this ground that they're ministers of Christ, then he's simply saying that he can come with a counterclaim that is far superior to theirs. And so now he begins to speak about himself, and he says, this is as though I'm insane. He moves beyond saying I'm foolish, I'm insane now as I talk in this manner. No matter, he says, I have to show this area that I'm superior in them with. And so he shows all of these areas. And the first is, it talks about his work. It talks about his labor. And this goes back to what we've talked about before, that Paul was a tent maker. In Corinth, he made a living for himself and did not receive ministry from the church. He made it clear that he could receive ministry and help and financial help from the church, because he said if anyone gives spiritual food to someone or gives them spiritual things, then they can expect to get material things back from those people that they give spiritual things to. And so he's justifying the fact that he could take money from them to live on, but he chose not to do that. And so this is talking about his labor. And he's talking here about the fact that his labor and his work has been far greater than any of theirs. We saw a week or so ago that all the false apostles in that area were taking salary, I guess you'd say. It may have come in the means of food and other things, but they were taking from the church and they were living on the ministry coming from the church. But Paul didn't do that. So he's saying, my labor has been greater than all of theirs. He had been in prison, he says, more times than they had. We don't know of even the fact that they ever went to prison once. But it's pretty clear that Paul went to prison at least 7 times for his preaching the gospel. Now, what does that say? What does that say today to the preacher that's living in a $3 or $4 or $5 million house, as much as the cars that some people drive, and are just relishing in the fact that Christianity and a minister serving God should just have the abundance of everything just poured out on them. That they're just wealthy. They're the most well-kept people in the whole area. It doesn't connect. It just does not connect with Scripture. It just does not connect with Paul's ministry. It does not connect with the people of the Bible in the first century, in the early church. It just doesn't compute. Now, has God promised to bless His faithful servants? Absolutely. Is He blessing His servants? Absolutely. But that does not always mean that we're all going to be millionaires and we're all going to be like some of these people that are saying, look at me, I'm a minister of the gospel, and look what I get for being that. And then try to put it upon their people to say, hey, you need to be in your position just as cool as I am in mine. You need to expect the same things that I'm expecting. And then you need to boast about it as I boast about it. I was told one time that there's a church in this area it's been really made a big issue before the whole church because the pastor's daughter wears blue jeans that cost $85 a pair. Like, what does that have to do with the gospel? What does that have to do with church? What does that have to do with anything other than, look at me. Look how wealthy God has made me. Look, my daughter can wear blue jeans that cost $85 a pair. Look at the car I drive. Look at all of these things. And then the idea is, you owe me these things because I'm a minister of the gospel. And now I'm telling you that if you're not doing as well as I'm doing, then there's something wrong with you. You must be living in sin, or you must not have enough faith. Because if you were not living in sin and had enough faith, then you would be like me. That's what a lot of people are getting, and it's a terrible shame because it's not right. It's just false. Now he goes on. He says he had been the victim, really here, of countless beatings that these false apostles had never experienced. They had not experienced any poor treatment or ill conditions because of their faith in Christ. Now listen to me. This gives us some information here. Jesus, in the Word of God, it's been made clear that Jesus disciplines those who are His children. Now, those who claim to be His children float through this life never facing discipline. It's all their way, always, every time. Life is a bowl of cherries. Then what does that say about that person? I'll leave that to you to fill in the line. But I think it preaches loudly concerning this. Because the true Christian is going to face trials and tests and difficulties at different times in their life. Again, does that mean God doesn't love us? He doesn't bless us? Absolutely not. Before you leave here today, we're going to see that the trials and the tests and the blessings that we experience as Christians are the greatest favors that God can and does give to us as His children. The people who are in sad condition are the people who have no need. Those are the saddest people on earth. Whether they be people who have not realized their need and come to salvation as yet, or whether they be those who claim to have come to salvation but have no need. Their life is just perfect. They need nothing. They need no one else. They have it all. And so, this is not a recommendation for being a Christian. This is a recommendation for not being right with God. Yet, it is turned in much of the teaching in the church and in our country today, it's turned around and it's come at backwards. And that's exactly what it is. It's backwards from what God really teaches in the Word and what He really does. Now look at verse 24. He says, 5 times I received from the Jews 39 lashes. Paul now gives specific examples of the bad treatment that he received as a Christian and as a Christian minister. 5 times he had received the Jewish 39 lashes. Now, this was the maximum number that any judge could give, was the 39 lashes. Actually, it was 40 lashes, but they were so afraid if they lost count or something that they would give more than 40, that they made it 39. And the way that they usually did it, they would have a lash with three straps or thongs on it, which simply meant that for 39 lashes, they hit the person 13 times. 13 times 3 makes 39. So that would be 39 strokes that they were hit with the 3 different lashes, but it only took 13 times that they were actually hit. But this is one of the things that had happened to Paul 5 times. Now, can you imagine a preacher today getting up in a pulpit and saying, I want to share with you my resume? And he starts out, well, okay, I've been beat up by the religious establishment 5 times with 39 lashes. And then imagine him going through this list. And this being a list given to say, I'm telling you this about me. You're thinking about getting me as your pastor. I'm giving you this information so you can determine whether I'm the man of God for you or not. This would be hilarious in some churches. He probably wouldn't get past the 5 times he'd been beaten with 39 lashes. But 25 goes on. He says, 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I have spent in the deep. Here he says 3 times he was beaten with rods. Now, it was illegal to treat a Roman citizen like Paul in this manner. It was illegal. Yet 3 times they beat Paul with rods, even though he was a full-fledged Roman citizen. He was stoned in Lystra, and it was such a severe stoning that the people walked away thinking he was dead. Yet, he got up, walked away, and went to preach the gospel somewhere else. He says he's been shipwrecked 3 times. He said he spent a night and a day, or we could say a night period and a day period, a 24-hour period, adrift at sea. So you can imagine how he thought, this must be the end of it, you know. But this is the bed of roses that Paul enjoyed. Okay? This is the high lifestyle that he enjoyed. And, you know, somehow God just made a mistake with Paul. You know, somehow he didn't get the later message that we're hearing today, that Paul should have been put on a pedestal and just exalted everywhere he went and just lavish upon him the greatest of gifts and blessings, and him have the greatest, most carefree, enjoyable life that any man on earth could have. 26. I've been on frequent journeys, in dangers from rivers, dangers from robbers, dangers from my countrymen, dangers from the Gentiles, dangers in the city, dangers in the wilderness, dangers on the sea, and dangers among false brethren. Now, Paul has made all these various places, and everywhere he's gone, he's been in danger. He says, first of all, in danger to rivers. This would refer to during flood stage, in which they would have to cross rivers that were dangerous because they were flooding. In danger of robbers, could bring us back to the thought of the parable of the Good Samaritan. He's walking down the road, he gets jumped, he gets beat up. That kind of stuff happened. In danger from my countrymen and my own fellow man or countrymen. Here he's talking about the Jews who sought to kill him because he accepted Christ and moved away from the teaching that salvation came by works of the law. Those were his fellow countrymen. They were in Judaism together and were Jews together. And so when Paul makes this move toward Christianity, then they all start wanting to try to kill him. So he's in danger from people that he once had a relationship with. He says in danger from the Gentiles. This is talking about the times in which he was put in situations that his life was threatened. It happened in Philippi. It happened in Ephesus. There could be a whole city just in an uproar, wanting to take Paul and just do bodily harm to him because of him preaching the gospel. He says in dangers in cities. So this again is talking about he would go from city to city and preach the gospel. And so everywhere he went, he had this to face. A word was spoken over him just before he went to Jerusalem the last time. And the prophet that did it took Paul's belt, I think it was, and he tied it up and said, so it will be with the one who wears this when they go to the city. And so they started trying to talk him into not going and beg him and crying and all to say, don't go and put yourself in this danger and all. But, he just brushed it off and said, I'm ready to go die for my faith in Christ. Again, just think about what you can hear from some people in their preaching of the kind of life a minister and a Christian should be enjoying if they're really under God's blessing in this day and time. Then he says in dangers from the wilderness. This most likely is from storms, wild beasts, all kinds of different things of that nature, because they didn't have, Hiltons or whatever to go in and stay at night, in the presidential suite or whatever. They slept outside. So they were in danger to the elements. They were in danger to beasts, wild beasts. He says in danger on the sea. Now when you look back at seafaring and travel in that day, if you went out to sea, you were in danger. It was just a dangerous business. So a lot of his traveling on his missionary journeys was by ship. And we see that big deal in the last part of Acts. This just verse after verse after verse after verse talking about this terrible storm that they were in and the things that happened and how God let the ship be wrecked. But he, as he promised Paul, everyone would be saved. And so everyone there was saved. But they still went through this terrible shipwreck. Now he says, in danger to false brethren. There's probably never been a time in the history of the church that there hasn't been something working within the church, stirring to bring accusation, false treatment against certain people in the church. And so here's Paul, instead of getting put on a pedestal, as we've been talking about, instead of, you sit down over here, Paul, and we're going to come and lavish all our goodies on you and treat you like a king. Instead, Paul had to go to churches, and he had to go expecting the fact that there's probably somebody there going to stab him in the back. And unfortunately, that's the way it is in some churches today. And we made mention the other day about the fact of sometimes that comes from other staff people in churches. They have an idea like, I think I'd be a better pastor here than the pastor that's here. So they begin to work their little magic and start drawing the people just slowly and gently away from the minister and drawing them over into their little sheepfold. And once they reach a certain position, then they can have enough people that they go for it, and they sort of bring a coup in the church and kick the present preacher out and bring themselves in, or whoever they're wanting to bring in under their authority and support. And so all this is done in the name of Christianity. This is all this is the church. Happened throughout all the history of it. Happened to Paul. Happens today. It just happens. And that's the way it is. So Paul is just pointing the truth out here into what it really means to be a minister of the gospel and what he's really experienced. And again, he's comparing this to the false teachers and the false apostles who had experienced none of this. None of this at all. Now, he says, I have been in labor and hardship through many sleepless nights in hunger and thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure. It is believed that these verses here, Paul is talking about the various towns that he went to, and again, the labor that he did to support himself and those who ministered with him. And he's pointing this out, this labor and hardship. And again, this was not something that the false apostles experienced. When they went to like Corinth, or they went into a church or whatever, I mean, they didn't raise a finger to do anything for themselves. They were expected to be treated like royalty. And anything and everything they needed would be brought to them. It would be provided for them by the church that they were working in. I guess it's possible that you could get large enough and famous enough in ministry that you'd have to say, if somebody invited you to come and minister at their church, that you would have to say, you got to tell me some about your church. If you can't raise at least $10,000 for a weekend being there, I can't come. If you don't have at least 1,000 people, I just can't come. I just can't come. Because there's going to be so many people in the area. If you don't have a facility big enough, that if I come there, people are not going to get in because your facility is too small. And I can't come for less than $10,000 because it costs so much for my jet to get me there. I'm just really in a tight spot here. I can't go to God and say, God, do you want me to go preach there or not? It's, no, can you meet the requirements I have? And if you can meet the requirements, then I may consider putting your church on the list. But if you can't, sorry that you can't get me. You'll have to just do the best you can with somebody else. Now, you may think this is false. This is not false at all. Invite a popular, powerful preacher to our church. This is the good thing about J.O. J.O. could have said, what? You're going to have 15 or 20 men there? I don't ever speak to anything that small. How much money are you going to give me? None of that. None of that. But you let somebody make an invitation to some bigwig and say, we want to invite you to come and hold a revival or a weekend service or something at our church. Well, how large is your church? How many can your church seat? And on and on. And if you can't hold 1,000, our man can't come. That's the minimum. Okay? Now, maybe good, well-meaning preachers have to do this. I have never known anything like this. I just may be so stupid that this is what they have to do. Do you think it's possible that they just have to do that? That it's just the will of God that they must require all of this? Do you think that's possible? I mean, would God really want it that way? Or would God want that person to be humble enough to say, if a church our size invited him and God said go, they would come? With no prearranged preconceptions of what they would receive? You know, a lot of them will say, where will the minister be staying while he's there? Hey, and if that place does not meet the standard, they won't be there. They won't show up. And this is normal, week in, week out for a lot of preachers. It's the way they operate. Sleepless nights due to anxiety and physical discomfort, probably. You know, can you imagine the fit that some of these guys would throw if the temperature was 2 degrees higher than what they liked in the fancy motel you were putting up in, or hotel? But here's Paul, he's out sleeping in the wilderness, you know, and he's anxious, he's not comfortable, and all for the physical position he's in. I've got to hurry on. He goes on, he talks about hunger and thirst without food. This is not talking about fasting, it's talking about actually being without food. He talks about cold and exposure. This is actually talking about the fact that he's in circumstances in which night after night, this great man of God was out in the cold, freezing and cold, and you know, oftentimes didn't have but one garment to wear. One of his writings to one of the men said, "Be sure and bring the cloak that I left in certain other church," because it was probably getting cold. He had nothing but the one outfit that he had over his body right then. And so this is the reality of what we see here. And again, you can see there's a humongous discrepancy between what we're told today and what we're seeing here. Now, I need to rush along. 28. He says, apart from such external things, there's the daily pressure on me, a concern for the churches. So here's Paul, he meets all this other stuff that's wearing him out physically, emotionally, and all, but then he has to deal with the fact that he's concerned all the time with the condition of the churches. He establishes a church, he goes off somewhere else to establish another church, and then these guys fall in right behind him to try to destroy and take over the work that he's done in the power of God. Now, 29, he says, who is weak without my being weak? Who is led into sin without my intense concern? Here we see that Paul empathizes with the weak to the point that he becomes weak himself. He is led to sin, who is led to sin without my intense concern? Literally, this is in the Greek. Who is made to stumble and I do not burn? It's a very interesting phrase here. When Paul saw the false teachers leading the Corinthians astray, he was made to burn with righteous indignation toward them, just like Jesus was made to burn with righteous indignation when he ran the money changers out of the temple and said it's been made a den of thieves instead of a house of prayer. And this is what Paul is talking about here. And so, again, we see this being so different from what we might hear and expect today. Verse 30, he says, if I have to boast, I will boast of what pertains to my weakness. And this is the key of the whole sermon today. If I have to boast, I will boast of what pertains to my weakness. Notice here that Paul is not boasting in the normal way you would think of someone boasting. Boasting would be telling how many churches he planted last year, telling how many books he sold, telling how many tapes he sold, telling how many countries he went to, telling the number of people millions of people that he spoke to, whether on TV, radio, or in person the past year. That would be boasting. Okay? Paul's not doing that. He says, if I'm going to boast about anything, I'm going to boast in my weakness. Now, he's not boasting out of strength, but he's boasting out of weakness. The guys that were running around in that day and claiming to be the true apostles, but who were false. Everything about their ministry, everything about their life, everything about them was 180 out from where Paul was. And instead of boasting about all their accomplishments and their achievements, like we've already seen that they were doing, Paul comes and says, if I'm going to boast, I'm going to boast in my weakness. Now I want to close with this thought. God has really been dealing with me a lot lately about this. And I believe that the greatest gift that God can give any person is the awareness of their weakness. The awareness of just exactly who they are by themselves apart from God. I think it's the most important thing that can happen to a lost person, because the Bible is clear. If a person is never brought to a place in their life to understand their need of something beyond themselves, they can never be saved. They can never be saved. People who have everything like they want, as they want it, they're self-sufficient, they can't be saved. They can't be saved until the Spirit of God allows them to come to a place of brokenness to some degree. Because salvation is impossible without that. And so, the greatest gift that a lost person could have today would be the awareness that I have need. I can't make it through this life on my own. I need something and someone beyond myself. Yet the world just turns it around. If you've got the tiger by the tail on a downhill run, then you've got it made. If you're facing any kind of a difficulty, then poor you. But in God's kingdom, it's the reverse. Poor you if you have no need. Now, you go on to look at Christians, and you realize the same truth. Because the greatest gift the Christian can have is the awareness of need and weakness. Because when we are aware of our neediness, our weakness, then and only then does God move in by His Spirit and begin to work through us with power. His power is perfected in our weakness. And so, we just need to realize that the Christian or the Christian minister who is boasting extravagantly about what they accomplish and how that money is being brought into them from every direction, that they are wearing these kind of clothes and these expensive shoes and this expensive plane and all of these things that you hear today. You got to realize these guys are talking about something different than what the New Testament is talking about. These guys are experiencing something different than men like Paul and Peter and John and other men through the centuries who for the faith of the gospel have been burned at the stake, have been crucified upside down, have lost everything in material possession they could ever hope to have, and considered by the world worthless. There's a different picture of what heaven has and what true Christianity and true ministry is all about, compared to what this nation and many in our nation make out true Christianity and true ministry to look like. And I want to tell you now, if you look at your life as a Christian and you realize, man, I've got needs. Not only do I have needs spiritually, I've got needs physically, I've got needs emotionally, I've got needs financially. Because it doesn't matter how much you're worth right now, you still need God to be able to wake up tomorrow with enough food to survive tomorrow. Because listen to me, in the society, the country, the world we're living in, we could be millionaires today and broke tomorrow. All it's going to take is just a quick snap. And everything that we think we've earned, everything that we think we've got, everything we're counting on for the golden years could go down the tubes overnight. Overnight. You say that's impossible. There are too many safety factors now. No, they're not. People have tried to implement the safety factors. But when you're $19 trillion in debt, there are no safety nets. That's where we are. We can't count on being able to support ourselves this time next week. And with that realization, there's only one to look forward to and look to. And it is Jesus, it is God, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And we have nothing else to put our hope in. And if you recognize that, you are one of the most blessed Christian people walking on the face of this earth. You are rich, you are wealthy, because you know your need of God. And the poorest souls breathing breath right now are those who think, I've got it made, I don't need anybody, and I don't need anything. If you've been confused, don't leave confused today. Know the truth from the Word of God and the truth in the spiritual realm. And if you've got some need, rejoice. And go to God and give Him the whole list. I tell you what, I've reached a place in my life that I cannot even expect being able to pull the cord on the lawnmower the next time to mow the yard. You understand what I'm saying? And I'm not joking. I'm not joking a moment. I got to have God to enable me to pull the cord on the lawnmower. If He don't show up for me to get that mower started, and my hip and leg not hurt so much that I can actually do the work, then I'm going to have to let the leg do it. And she thinks all lawnmowers have electric starters. No, she does not. I could really be in trouble over that one. Not really. You understand what I'm saying? And I've taken you a minute or two over here, but I want you to really grasp this. Because we each one need to grasp it. And we need to pray for the church in the condition it's in our world today. Because it's not the church the way God wants it for the most part. I will close with one other thing that really doesn't tie into this, but Paul Corncob shared it with me this morning, and it's devastating. It's heartbreaking. But he was in Portland 2 weeks ago, and he said there was a big United Methodist Church conference in Portland, and when he was there, and the main feature of discussion at the United Methodist Church big, I guess, national conference, it was national, right? National conference was to invite all the gay, lesbian churches in under the umbrella of the United Methodist Church. The United Methodist Church, at one time in this nation, was planting more churches, spreading more of the gospel, and seeing more people saved than any other denomination in this nation. If we don't keep our eyes on Jesus, the only thing that can happen is that we fall. Today, if you're here and you have any need in your life and you would like prayer, then our prayer team will be back there ready to pray for you. They will not look down upon you, but they will be able to understand and pray with a heart of love and understanding for you. If you'd like to participate in the ministry of this church, our offering bucket is here. We'd like to invite you to drop in your tithes and offering. Before you move, I have one quick important announcement here concerning the tithes and offerings. This is a praise to God. 3-4 weeks ago, I told you that we were going to have to cut the amount of our giving from around $6,000+ a month to $3,100 a month, which would still be good giving, but the income had slowed and we were going to have to cut it, so we would still be at the 50% point at that rate of giving. Well, God has intervened and we have not had to make that cut. And so God has graciously intervened, and we're still able to give the $600 a month to 9 different ministries, plus our local benevolent fund. So praise God for that. Thank you for your participation, and let's just continue to do this so that we can continue to bless people around the world. God bless you. You're dismissed.